session is down with Gaza, and the speakers that we have lined up today will come in on various aspects of this ongoing genocide and slaughter. So firstly to speak will be Leila Shamali, and she will speak for 10 minutes on what's happening in Palestine.
Thank you. It's really hard to say in the first sentence, really. We're a year into genocide. As I was preparing to write my speech, I wrote that line, and I read it again and again, and I'm horrified. How have you let the Zionist entity get away with committing this genocide in front of our eyes? As I followed the news coverage, it was clear to me why. What was being reported were sanitized versions of the death and destruction in Gaza, a version the Zionist entity is happy with. A young journalist, 19 years of age, was murdered yesterday in Gaza in an airstrike, simply for covering the destruction by Israeli airstrikes in Gaza and acting as a citizen journalist. They threatened him through text that if he did not stop, they would kill him and his family. And they did. They killed him, his family, and the truth he was delivering to all of us, who knew no one else would deliver it. Today, and in Ireland, media plays by the same Zionist book, reporting as if it's blind to truth, parroting the script handed to them, refusing to even mouth the word genocide, let alone name the perpetrators. This government went head first to condemn the Iranian attack on Zionist military and air bases. But a year into genocide, the genocide of Palestinians, and now extending to Lebanese people, the words were dressed in shallow concern. Mere empty words and semantics, anyway. Lebanese people are now being massacred too, but the response is silence and pseudo-concern. If you haven't arrived today, a year into genocide, at the conclusion that what Zionism promises to this world is only genocide and brutality, and therefore must be defeated, you must question your humanity. The truth is that Zionism since its creation until today has been a genocidal settler colonial ideology, rooted in the elimination of Palestinians entirely, and those who fight for it, fight against it, in words or in resistance. As Stephen Salaita has written in his brilliant article recently, he says, if Zionism lives, Palestinians die. That's a simple equation. If you'd like to salvage Zionism in any form, whether through two-state solution or through coexistence, you are signing off the death of Palestinians. Well, the Irish government has already signed off our death many times anyway. Palestinians crushed under the rubble are demanded to wait. Wait until the Irish government wakes up, until the Irish media stops spreading Zionist propaganda, for institutions to recognize that genocide is happening. We have a saying in Palestine that goes, those with their hands in water are different than those with their hands in fire. You can't demand that people who are living in a house on fire, that they must wait. It's in fact a death sentence. The truth is, Palestinians knew all along that the Irish government was gaslighting them and the movement. We knew that. It was the brilliant investigative journalism of the ditch that confirmed our doubts. We see how this government, Fianna Fáil, Fine Gael and the Greens, has sold their soul to the US empire and NATO, while hoping they can concede Irish neutrality under the table. In fact, Irish neutrality sounds very cynical, or a cynical joke, when you just read mere articles, or any article really published by the ditch. All of them expose that. They lied about the dual-use goods, the licenses to transfer military goods over Shannon, and the fact that the military goods were even being transferred at all. But how dare they lie in front of all of our faces and expect us to sit idle while they participate in the machinery of genocide, while at the same time they make a submission in support of the ICJ case. Wow, what an absolute farce of a government. The fact is, and I must say this, although it might be controversial, the Occupied Territories Bill is in fact the lowest common denominator between political parties. We're not asking for much. We've been asking that for too many years. And yet, the Occupied Territories Bill has not been implemented. Right? And this is appalling. At this stage, we shouldn't be lowering the bar of our demands. In fact, we should be raising them way higher. We should go far beyond the mere Occupied Territories bill into something even further than that, ending all trade with the Zionist entity. Even more further than that, calling for the end of the Zionist entity itself. Because simply, and I tell you what, simply Palestinians and those who are experiencing the horrors of Zionism now cannot wait any longer. Thank you.
Thanks so much for that. Our next speaker, we will have Jean O'Kenny, who will speak for 5 minutes on standing for Gaza and the demands of the movement.
Thanks for everybody today for being here, and it's probably a somber occasion in terms of what's going on in the Middle East, but you know, there is hope. I think we saw hope yesterday with the fantastic protest of 50,000 people and more. It was really kind of heartwarming when there's, you know, depths of despair when you kind of watch the news, and I think, you know, this is politicising the whole generation, like the Vietnam War done in the late 60s and 70s, where a whole layer of people probably weren't political, but now are looking to get involved with politics and are looking at the hypocrisy of the West and the horrors that Israel and the Americans are doing to the people of Gaza and well beyond. And like in the past, we've seen this country stand up to the plate in terms of oppression. And probably one of the best examples is the North Star strike in 1994. And this eventually led to South African apartheid fruit projects being completely banned. And then that had a kind of a great kind of momentum across the world and so forth. So, you know, this can be done where there's a political will. And also we've seen throughout the last 18 months where kind of people have been protesting in the universities across the world. Unbelievable protests in the United States, even in Trinity College, where they actually forced Trinity College to stop kind of investing in Israeli banks. So these things are really, really positive where people can engage, because I think if you're like me, I think when you look at the news, you feel kind of despondent sometimes, you can feel very powerless. But when you become as a collective, the protests yesterday, when we become as workers collectively, when we become as students collectively, we're much more powerful. And that you can kind of, I suppose you can say that to a lot of things. But I think particularly in this particular time where we have to come together. Just another kind of power of the boycott movement. AXA Insurance was forced to withdraw from its interest in the Israeli banks, and that's a really, really good thing, you know, in the wider scheme of things. The Occupied Territories Bill, Ambana has said, I mean, it's a very, very kind of, you know, it's welcome that we're talking about bills like the Occupied Territory, but it doesn't go far enough. It does not go far enough whatsoever. But it just shows the cowardice of Fine Gael and Fianna Fáil. They're not enacting this bill, even though Fianna Fáil in the last administration said that they would. But they're under pressure. They really are under pressure to enact this bill, because if this bill was enacted, even though it's kind of, there's huge limitations in terms of this bill, can you imagine the signal that would actually send to the world? Imagine the signal that it would send to the Israelis, because what the Zionists are absolutely terrified of is economical sanctions against their state. And one of the ways that you can really kind of undermine design a state is via the European-Israeli agreement, which is worth, I mean, absolutely incredible amounts of money. I think it's worth $46 billion dollars per year. And, you know, it's incredible these economical systems that the Israeli, the occupation can develop on. Just in terms of the hypocrisy, and I think we can say that the hypocrisy where Russia, there's been sanctions on Russia across the board, but yet Israel hasn't been sanctioned whatsoever. And there's no accountability, there's no kind of any sort of sanctions against the Israeli state. So, you know, in all this, you know, you can't be kind of despondent, you can be kind of ground down, where it's important that collectively we come together. And as socialists, I think we can be very, very proud of our critique of what we're, what we stand for in terms of sanctions against Israel, how we kind of, we're kind of get involved in protests and so forth. So we can be very proud of that, but we need to go much further in terms of actually putting pressure on governments and so forth, because governments, Western governments, have been shown that they will not act for the people, but as workers and students and collectively we can actually put pressure on governments, and that has been done, as I said, in the 1980s via the Dusar strike and other strikes in previous times. Just finally, around the Israeli ambassador, and I know the Israeli ambassador is on leave at the moment, but she should stay on permanent leave. So, look, we're unequivocal. The Israeli ambassador and all the diplomatic team should be absolutely expelled from this country. There is no justification and no moral basis where an Israeli ambassador and the diplomatic kind of corps can actually stay in this country. They should be gone a long, long, long time ago. It's a stain on humanity where this country keeps people design this regime in their heart. So there's no border, and they should be thrown out of this country. Thank you.
Thanks, Ian. I think it's very important to highlight the demands of the movement when we have so many political parties actively going against those demands. So next, our speaker is McNeil from the Ditch. We'll give you 10 minutes to speak, and he'll be speaking on their reporting of flights through Irish airspace.
Thanks so much for having me, guys. Yeah, look, it's not that long ago. I think it was April when the most decent man in Ireland, Micheál Martin, he accused Breed of muddying the waters about weapons travelling through Irish territory on their way to be used in Israel's ongoing genocide. And he was completely unequivocal about this issue. He said that Irish airports, Irish airspace was not being used to bring weapons to the IDF for their ongoing campaign. Equally, Simon Harris, similarly, he didn't equivocate about this. He said it wasn't happening. Eamon Ryan similarly said, he used his words quite carefully, he said that weapons weren't being brought directly to Israel through Irish airspace. Going back now to, it was the end of August, where our first report on the matter has shown these pronouncements to have been false, we could call them lies. We first reported about a multinational airline called Challenge Group, which has brought from October 2023 till around February of this year more than 56 tons of explosives to the Israel Defense Forces. After we carried that report, the Department of Transport, which we have been engaging with over the course of our reporting, they finally announced that they have an ongoing investigation into the matter and that they're engaging with the airline. There isn't really much to engage with this airline about. It's all there in black and white. They have illegally brought weapons through Irish airspace to the Israel Defense Forces. Equally, since they announced this investigation, we've since reported on a further 14 flights from that one particular airline. So the Department of Transport have said that they're investigating 9 flights. We've since reported an additional 14, which these flights were carrying parts for F-35 fighter jets from Lockheed Martin in the US to Israel, which the IDF are using to drop bombs on Gaza. Also, throughout the course of our reporting on the matter, over the last month, 2 months, we've since identified other airlines that are doing the same thing. We have El Al, which is Israel's national carrier. Similarly to Challenge Group, they are making flights from Lockheed Martin's US base to its base in Israel. We've also reported on Delta Airlines. We've also reported on Lufthansa, Germany's national carrier, doing the same thing. Now, while we were reporting on these flights, Michal Martin has said that government is open to the possibility of banning airlines that have breached Irish airspace in this manner. He said that when we had only reported on one airline, Challenge Group, which is it's a long-established, well-reputed international airline. It's not of the same level as, say, like Lufthansa or Delta Airlines. I think that's easier for the state to ban an airline like that rather than someone like Delta or Lufthansa. Equally, to go back to what Eamon Ryan said, he had said that weapons of war weren't being brought through Irish airspace directly. And it was an interesting choice of words. He obviously has some very expensive advisors advising him on words to use. I've worked on the other side of things myself. I know I'm in journalism now. I've done a little bit of PR work, and I know that those words don't get put into sentences if there isn't a reason, right? And the state now is trying to say that we didn't receive any applications for exemption, so we didn't know. We're supposed to believe that the state hasn't known about these flights for, personally I'd say, many, many years. And the state has been really quite happy with that state of affairs. I mean, myself and the boys, before we dropped the first report on this, and we were kind of talking about, you know, when the Department of Transport, when Simon Harris's department, when Michal Martin's department, when they got our request for comment, you know, what would they be saying in the room? Personally, I think they're just sort of going, oh, for fuck's sake. Because, look, I can say it now, we don't say it in our reports, I can say it quite confidently that, and I think most people in this room would agree that they knew and they were happy with this state of affairs, and they're happy to talk about recognising Palestinian statehood. They're happy for people like Leo Varadkar to go over to DC on St. Patrick's Day and make a mildly critical speech of Israel in front of Joe Biden, and we're all supposed to kind of clap our hands about that. They'll call for a ceasefire, which after a year of an ongoing genocide just sounds like an increasingly weak and ridiculous thing to be calling for. We also, on top of this, Eamon Ryan, when he was at the United Nations General Assembly, Gavin Riley tweeted a photo of him. This isn't how we go with Gavin Riley's journalism, of course. He tweeted a photo of him and said that Eamon Ryan is in New York to play senior hurling with the environment. He didn't ask him about these flights. Now, if I'm Eamon Ryan and I'm Ireland's most serious and most sensible environmentalist, I'd be absolutely raging if I found out that weapons of war were passing through my territory on flights that I knew nothing about. But there doesn't seem to be any sense of urgency from Eamon Ryan. Related to all this, we recently carried a report about Pascal Donoghue giving a secret assurance to his Israeli counterpart that Ireland would block the progress of the Occupied Territories Bill. Now, I'm not sure if anyone read the Sunday Times today. Front page, we have John Mooney telling us that there's a Russian spy in Leinster House. And,
along with 80 American spies.
This kind of reporting, security, defence, intelligence reporting, it's inherently imperial, as we all know. and it always serves a particular purpose. There's a particular style to it. Typically it is an unnamed source tell us that an unnamed person is doing an unnamed thing. This is what John Mooney said today in the Sunday Times. Now, our reporting is a little bit different. We said that Paddy Cohen from the Israeli Ministry of Justice said that Yossi Ackerman from the Israeli Ministry of the Economy had said that Pascal Donoghue made a confidential phone call with his Israeli counterpart in which he said he would block the progress of the Occupied Territories Bill. We're a little bit more precise. I'm conscious of the fact that I'm at a People Before Profit conference. I don't have to stand up here and talk about how terrible Israel's ongoing genocide is in Gaza and the West Bank, and why it should be imposed on moral and ethical grounds. What I would add to it is that within those leaked files from the Israeli state, there were officials talking about how they could advance their campaign to block the progress of the Occupied Territories Bill. There was a line in one email where they said something like, should we focus our attention through companies based in Ireland? And they mentioned Intel, for example, and they had a contact in Intel whom they could reach out to, who could help them advance their cause. And it speaks to the inherently capitalist nature of the Israeli project in Ireland, and the fact that this blurred line between public and private power, and a lot of the companies on which we have built our economy. We had a budget last week where Pascal Donoghue and Jack Chambers, they announced measures. They were temporary once-off measures. It was effectively hush money, once-off payments to people that didn't do anything to alter the relationship between the people of Ireland and capital and the state and the companies on which our whole economy is founded. And we can see that although it would be perverse and absurd to draw some kind of equivalence between the Palestinian experience and the Irish colonial and post-colonial experience, they come from the same structures and they happen for the same reason. Not to the same level, of course, but it's colonialism and imperialism, and we are all affected by it, and that's why we need to continue to oppose it, both out of solidarity and because we are experiencing the same thing ourselves. Thanks very much for having me, guys.
Thanks so much, and that, investigative journalism is very important in times now when we get really trying to put a Zionist message forward or just cut across any real messaging that's coming from Palestine and the role that's coming has to play. Our final speaker now is Conor Eddy from People for Profit. He'll have 5 minutes. He's going to speak about defending earning neutrality, no to end up and no to militarisation.
It's the really unenviable task of following the 3 speakers we've had. I think it's been something that's probably flowed from all the contributions so far. So we have a very deep problem with the Irish political establishment. We are a ruling class. I guess, despite their crocodile tears, despite what you had from Simon Harris at Ryan Tubridy during the week, despite the grand statements that they sometimes make about Palestinian statehood or about where Ireland stands in the world, I think they're deeply, deeply embarrassed by the numbers of people that continually show out on the streets of Palestine, that continually put themselves on the line to drive this solidarity movement forward. And I think every step of the way so far, those bits of progress that we have made, getting the state to join the ICJ case, getting the state to recognise Palestine, getting the government to make the limited statements that they have so far, it's been because of that movement that we've got that progress. It's been because we've dragged them kicking and screaming every step of the way. I think, even though you have those crocodile tears from Simon Harris, it also has to be said there's a lot of work to do. On Tuesday, he's going to get on a plane and go back to shake hands with Genocide Joe Biden in the White House, against the wishes of almost everybody, I think, in this state. I think the call that we make today, it's a very clear one, is that you shouldn't go to Washington. You should sit that one out. So when I say we have a problem with the political establishment in this country, obviously I mean Fine Gael and Fianna Fáil, but I don't just mean Fine Gael and Fianna Fáil. Owen touched on, I think, the role of the Green Party, the vegan wing of the Irish political establishment in all of this. But it goes beyond that still. Like, you look at Sinn Féin and the role that they played so far. It has to be said, one of those victories that we had in the early stages of the movement was dragging Sinn Féin, a party that comes out of anti-colonial struggle, back to the position that they had, the correct position on the expulsion of the Israeli ambassador. So I think there's something here, like, we've acknowledged that there's a problem with the ruling class, but socialists were probably uniquely placed to understand what that problem is and where it comes from. I think, like, first of all, if you look at what happened on Paddy's Day, you get a clue as to where it's coming from. You have everyone from the DUP right over to Fine Gael agreeing that we need to go to Washington. It tells you something. It tells you that there's a sacred cow there, that relationship that we have with America, that relationship that we have with imperialism worldwide, and I think it's out of our place in the world that these positions come, that reluctance to take concrete action. It's because Ireland's a tax haven. Owen talked about it. Owen talked about how we trade with the world, how we position ourselves as we're at the core of value extraction from the global south. We might be militarily neutral, but the fact is that Ireland is an absolutely central hub in the exploitation of the global south by the West and by NATO. So, like, conditions kind of determine consciousness. What you think about the world is shaped by your role within it. So if the Irish political establishment, if their sacred cow is a tax haven, they do everything they can to maintain that. It's not surprising that they take the stances that they do on Palestine. They're embarrassed, like I said earlier on, of what the movement are doing. They're embarrassed that they're not able to join the big boy table of cooperation with NATO. They're embarrassed that we won't give up our neutrality, that we won't get rid of our triple lock. That's the reality, that's where they're coming from, and they're miles away from the average person in this country who stands for decency, neutrality and a world without war. I think, and I know that we've acknowledged this, we've acknowledged that problem that we have with the ruling class in Ireland, and it leads us to the demands, and obviously the first two are very clear. First two right now have to be the most tangible steps that we can take to end genocide. So that's immediately taking action against those companies who've used Irish airspace to transport weapons. That should be sanctions on the likes of Lufthansa and Delta and every other company, that Irish company that's played a role. So that has to happen as a matter of urgency. But it can't just be that. Next weekend, people from all over Ireland will gather at Shannon Airport, which shamefully has been used for the last 20-odd years as a hub for American imperialism and the destruction of the Middle East. So that has to happen. It has to happen now, not just to end the genocide in Palestine and the slaughter in Lebanon, but to acknowledge what's happening in the world. We're living in an increasingly unstable world system. I think I remember reading recently that there's now more ongoing conflicts across the world than there's been at any time since the end of the Second World War. We're in a very scary place right now in the world, and Ireland has to decide where it situates itself within all of that. So that means closing Shannon, and it means ending the use of Irish airspace as an absolute priority. But it doesn't stop there. I think we have to kind of look at where we can make these steps from, where the movement comes from. Gino spoke quite powerfully about the role of workers and the role of students. We've seen with the university encampments, I think, a first step towards how we can win victories. We've seen the power of BDS and the power of very specific targets, like the investments that Trinity and the other universities have, and the academic ties that they've got to Israeli universities. I think when you look at the workers' movement, there's a sleeping giant there. We've seen yesterday the unions probably joining in the largest numbers they've done since last October, a demonstration for Palestine. Can't stop there either. Consistently we're told that it's illegal for workers to take political strike action. but I think we need to see bravery from Irish workers. We've seen it in the past, in the 1980s. We need to see, regardless of what the law says, workers taking action to stop complicity in the genocide. Close by saying every step of the way, People Before Profit and solidarity activists have led this movement on the ground. If you look at what happened around the Israeli ambassador earlier in 2023, if you look at what happened around the Washington visits, if you look at where the movement's at today, and if you look at yesterday on the streets where the largest block was, we've been at the absolute centre of it because we understand the centrality of this, the importance of it, the importance of placing Ireland among the kind of just nations of the world and reflecting within Irish politics what the vast majority of people actually think. We all know we're headed for an election very soon. This has to be on the ballot. Neutrality has to be on the ballot. Gaza has to be on the ballot. And we have to boot Fine Gael, Fianna Fáil and the Green Party out of power for people in Palestine and all around the world.
So we're going to bring in some speakers from the floor. First I have Richard, and then I'll have Ruth coming in to speak. After that I'll read out the resolution and we'll vote on that, okay?
Thanks, Million, and well done to all our speakers. And congratulations to Owen for saving the honour of journalism by telling the truth about our complicity with genocide. I just want to make an unashamedly political point because we are heading into an election, and that is that there is only one party, People Before Profit Solidarity, that is standing in this election that has unwaveringly stood with the people of Palestine, not just over the last year, but always. And I'm not saying that to blow our own trumpet, but to say something that's very important as we see huge numbers of people outraged, horrified at what is going on in Gaza, desperate for somebody to stand up against this and to end Ireland's complicity or silence with the horrors that Israel is committing against the Palestinians, now the Lebanese people, with the support of the army of the United States, of Britain, of the European Union. We are the only people who say clearly that the Palestinian people, the Lebanese people, have the right to resist this regime. And that the regime that is committing this genocide, that is guilty of apartheid, of brutal occupation of the seas of Gaza, has no place in the civilized world any more than apartheid South Africa had a place in the civilized world. And that absolute isolation, boycott, directed towards the dismantling of this regime is the only way we will end that horror. And what many of the parties are still doing is speaking out of both sides of their mouth. Because they know the vast majority of people in this country feel that, so they have to be seen to say things in solidarity with the Palestinian people, but when it actually comes to it, still provide justifications for Israel's crimes against the Palestinian people. I mean, in October, when we brought a resolution, after Israel commenced its genocide in Gaza, we brought forward a resolution in the Dáil demanding sanctions and naming Israel for the apartheid regime that was. 5 votes. 5 votes for that resolution. When the chips were down, they were mouthing excuses and providing the legitimacy for what Israel was going to go on to do in Gaza. When Ursula von der Leyen visited the Dáil months before October the 7th, the only people who stood up at the Dáil and called her out for her complicity with the Israeli regime was People Before Profit Solidarity. The only people. All the rest of them. Clapping her, standing up for her, commending her. We stood up, we warned that the European Union's complicity and her complicity with Israel would lead to a disaster and show the utter moral bankruptcy of the Western world. So it's not just because we're blowing our own trumpet. We have to elect people if we're truly horrified. If genocide has been perpetrated, we have to get as many people elected who will always stick with the Palestinians and will defend their right to resist. Apartheid, occupation, the siege of Gaza, the regime capable of genocide has no right to defend itself. It is the people here in Palestine and Lebanon, around the world, have the right to resist and bring that regime to an end.
I'd like to commend Owen for, highlighting the ongoing, turning a blind eye to what's happening in Shannon. It's in stark contrast to RTE, who've been reporting on this in a disgraceful fashion. During the week, for example, I turned on Morning Ireland and they were talking about Israel striking targets in Lebanon. That is the extent of how, pro-Zionist it has been. I also want to say that yesterday's march, I think, gave a huge boost to everybody, because none of us knew, this movement has lasted for a year, and in fact probably will go on. And the reason for that is, echoing what Gino said, this is this generation's Vietnam, but it's going beyond just Palestine. It is a youthful movement in general, of people who want to see the world run in a different way. It's beyond Palestine. It's no to colonialism, to racism, and to capitalism. In actual fact, I think it's very inspiring what's happening in the US. Students, others, and the point has been made how this movement has been. It's been inspiring. To be frank, an antidote to the far right, an antidote to the rise of racism and to misogyny and homophobia, etc. This movement stands in sharp contrast, but it has been lacking in one aspect, and that's the role of workers, because we haven't reached a point where there have been sufficient strikes, workers' action to stop and to blockade. There have been some very good examples, but nothing on the scale of what young people have tried to do, and I think that that's something that we have to really elevate now as a key demand. I just want to mention one other thing as well. I think we can make Palestine an election issue. It is an election issue already. We saw that there's no other issue that would get, I would say, 50,000 people. Often numbers are exaggerated, and I actually left the march early because I had to leave, and I was still seeing the march 15-20 minutes later. So it was definitely, to me, one of the biggest that there's been. And I think the fact it's gone on this long is bringing more and newer people out to say this has to stop. So ways that we can make it an election issue. Well, for example, we have a group in my own area, D15 with Palestine. It's been amazing to work with people in that group. Built up over a year, and still there's about 150 people on the WhatsApp group. Some people have left, others have come back. But it's also brought us into contact with the local Palestinian community, with Muslim community, and as well as lots of young people. And we're going to be organising a meeting during the election on the issue of making Palestine, on Palestine, but also on making it obviously a key issue. With 3 demands that I think are very obvious: signing the Occupied Territories Bill, stopping the use of Shannon as a stopover, and shutting down the Israeli embassy. And that's something that we can actually ask people. Will you ask people calling to your door, canvassing, will they agree with those 3 demands? Will they put up, can we get posters put up in windows? I think we can actually, this is going to be a very important issue for young people and for so many people. Thanks.
And final speaker is Sarah. We have Sarah here. No, doesn't seem to be. Is there anyone else that would like to take advantage of this 3 minutes and speak? Maybe we will move on to the resolution, if that's all right. Okay, guys, so resolution 3. This conference currently condemns Israel's genocide in support of the US in Gaza and indiscriminate bombing of Lebanon. The It also condemns attacks on Palestinians in the West Bank and on Yemen. This conference calls for an immediate ceasefire. The conference notes the failure of the Irish government to take real and effective actions to stop Israel. It calls on the Irish government to 1. Expel the Israeli ambassador and cut all diplomatic ties with Israel. 2. End all economic and trade relations with Israel. 3. Stop the use of Shannon and Irish airspace by the US military. And 4. Calls for an immediate end to the occupation of Gaza. This conference agrees to support the motion, to support mobilisation in support of Palestine and to make Palestine an election issue. So can I see all hands raised in favour? And against? Okay, thanks so much. And just to sum up then is Conor is going to pop back up onto the stage. So here you are.
So there's very little left to say. I think Ruth put it brilliantly. This movement has been about much more than just Palestinian liberation and ending a genocide. I think it has been a demonstration that people want a very different kind of world to the world that we live in at the moment. But I think I go further than that as well. Someone who was part of the occupations that happened in Trinity and some of the other universities, I've seen, like, through the Palestine movement, a way that we begin to build the types of networks that we need within our communities, within our universities and within our workplaces, actually realise that type of world. You look at the trade unions at the minute, unfortunately they're not anywhere near in the state that we need them to be in. But Palestine and building strikes to end the genocide could be the key to awakening the types of unions that we need to make advances for workers, to end the housing crisis, build, I guess, a fight back that we've wanted for a very long time. So I guess in the liberation of Palestine lies the liberation of us all, and that's what this movement offers. So not just into this election, but beyond that, I think our activists taking this issue up in an exemplary way so far. We need to continue that going forward. So hopefully we'll all do that after we leave here today in our communities, our workplaces and our universities, seeing this as absolutely central to everything we build going forward. Thanks.
Okay, just to finish the discussion, I would like to say that these discussions are important. And voting is important, but they all mean in reality without an active movement made from below, coming from below, made up of working class people and led by working class people. Without pressure from below, the government can kick the can down the road on whatever issue we want action on. And our collective action, historically as working class people, has won us rights from healthcare, education, our rights as workers. And Conor came in and spoke about the ideas of diplomacy that the government put forward, like even in terms of the White House, you know. When I was on South Dublin County Council, I had a Fine Gael councillor say to me that change comes from discussions in a room. You know, you really have to laugh at that. But to counteract that point, in the words of Black Panther and revolutionary Assata Shakur, nobody in the world, nobody in history has ever gotten their freedom by appealing to the moral sense of the people who are oppressing them. And that's why our action needs to be radical and militant in our approach to housing and all the pushback on our rights. And we do have a role to play in our communities, in our workplaces and in our colleges. And we need to remember that the capitalist system and all its institutions function to work against the regular person and to maintain the system. And we want a society that accommodates the majority, not just a few rich or developers or bankers. The reality here is that we're not outnumbered, we're out-organised. And if the ruling classes are united, then us as workers, as young people, need to be as well. We're up against it, but we do have the ability, we have the power to strike back where we're hurt and to create a society that instead of funding war, destruction and poverty, actually funds houses, services and resources that we need. So thanks for coming along today, everyone.